Could it be that the Israelis were disrupting Islamic worshipers? Throwing tear gas into a mosque? Beating up women? Bullying men? Maybe that's why it happened. Everything that Israel's doing is a war crime. You see, yes, under international humanitarian law, there are conditions in which a civilian object, such as a hospital, can be converted into a military object. And amongst those are if a hostile force is using it as a command and control point to barracks troops, to store ammunition, things of this nature. But in the law of war, there's also there's a criteria called distinction, meaning that in order to make a distinction between civilian and military, you have to have proof. You don't get to attack a hospital, then go on a fishing expedition to look for proof. That's not how the law of war works. You have to have absolute proof, or otherwise the object must be treated as a exclusively civilian object protected under international humanitarian law. As we see right now, Israel doesn't have proof. They're desperately searching for something that can back up the extraordinary claims they made about LSU. It's big, huge command and control underneath there, bunkers everywhere, guns, the whole thing. Where is it, Israel? Where is it? The fact that you're looking for it means you didn't know for certain it was there. You're guessing, and therefore you're guilty of murder, mass murder, a war crime. Every Israeli officer, every Israeli civilian authority associated with the attack on this hospital is guilty of a war crime and should be prosecuted as such. This isn't an accident. This isn't a mistake. The law of war is clear, and Israel has violated it 100%. People need to get angry. People need to start getting angry. I'm tired of people going, well, we're just going to have a civil discussion. Imagine your child dead right now in the hospital. Imagine your mother going in for surgery and dying in the recovery room because she can't get the medical care she needs. It's time for everybody to get angry. Israel no longer gets a pass. This isn't about anti-Semitism. I'm not anti-Semitic. This is about calling out a regime, the Netanyahu regime, as a war criminal regime. And they must be recognized as such and treated as such. And I'm telling every Israeli pilot right now, we may not know your names because you're protected by the Israeli defense establishment, but we know the date you dropped your bombs. And one day justice will come to you because the records are clear. You climbed into a cockpit and you received an order and you executed that order, and you are responsible for the due diligence of the target that you're striking. You are responsible. And if you know that you're carrying out an act of violence as part of the indiscriminate bombing, the collective punishment of the Palestinian people, you have committed a war crime by definition, and you will be found out and you will be held guilty, just like every Israeli officer on the ground in Gaza right now. Hey, you battalion commanders, if you have snipers under your command and they're in schools shooting children, you're guilty. You're guilty. They're all guilty, and it's time we call them out for what they are. You know, I have been accused of condemning the Germans in World War II for what the Nazis did. And people said, well, there were good Germans. They were just German soldiers doing their job. Maybe you can make that case, but you can't collectively say that because the Germans knew what they were getting into and the soldiers knew what they were fighting for. And at some point in time, it becomes evident that you are participating in a massive crime against humanity. This is why German generals, not SS officers, German generals were hung by the neck until dead because they turned a blind eye to these crimes they were responsible that took place under their command, even though they didn't give the orders. I hope and pray that someday there's a Nuremberg tribunal for these Israeli officers. And I want to see the look in their eyes as they're led up to the gallows, wondering in their mind what's going on as feel the noose around their neck, knowing they only have seconds to live before the executioner pushes a button, and their neck is snapped, because that's all they deserve. They don't deserve our adulation. They don't deserve our admiration. They don't deserve our sympathy. They deserve our mass condemnation for the criminals that they are. It's disgusting what's happening right now in Palestine. And this has nothing to do with Hamas. Nothing to do with Hamas. It has everything to do with Israel's national decision-making cycle, which mainstreams collective punishment, which singles out every single civilian in Gaza as an extension of Hamas, and that is a crime, a crime, a crime. And if you're a pro-Israeli person in the streets demonstrating for them, shame on you, because this isn't about protesting against anti-Semitism. If it was about protesting against anti-Semitism, I'd be marching alongside, because there's no room for anti-Semitism, especially now. This is not a Jewish problem. The Jews are not to blame. Stop pointing the fingers at the Jews. This is about Zionism, political Zionism. This is about people who have taken political Zionism and they've turned it into this expression of a greater Israel. Eretz Israel. Show me anywhere in international law where the global community has greenlighted greater Israel. Nobody has. It's only in the sick fantasy of the Israeli leaders who govern Israel today. And if you're an Israeli fighting for Israel, you're not fighting for the defense of Israel as defined by the United Nations, as defined by 1948 or even 1967. You are fighting for a greater Israel, which means that you are saying we encourage a war of aggression against all of our neighbors, not just the Palestinians. This is a criminal regime. This is a sick regime, and it has to go. That doesn't mean that Israel has to go, but Eretz Israel is finished. Needs to be finished, needs to be killed. And the whole world needs to rally around this cause. I'm ashamed of the Arab world right now. I'm ashamed of the Muslim world. They had an opportunity. They had that joint extraordinary meeting in Riyadh last Saturday where they had a chance to squeeze Israel dead with an oil embargo. And they chose not to, which means that they have chosen money and profit over Palestinian blood. So, yeah, this condemnation is across the board for the leaders in Saudi Arabia, for the leaders in Turkey, because Erdogan may be out there saying the right thing, but he's allowing Turkey to transport Azeri oil over a pipeline onto ships in Turkish ports where they're sent to Israel to fuel the war machine. So Erdogan, you're a hypocrite. Shut the oil and I'll listen to you. Sisi, you better mobilize all your divisions and put them on the border with Israel and tell them that you are marching to Jerusalem if this doesn't stop. The king of Jordan, the same. Make Jerusalem yours again. Reverse 1967. Syria, take the Golan Heights. It's time for Israel to be terminated as a political Zionist state, because until it is, these crimes will continue. The Palestinians mean nothing. Their lives mean nothing. We're at the point now where numbers mean nothing because they become so big, you can't really attach a human face to them. It's just a figure on a piece of paper.
When you step back and look at October 7th, what was the reality of that day?
Well, let's start with the name of the operation, Al-Aqsa Flood. Why does there have to be an Al-Aqsa flood? What is Al-Aqsa? It's a holy place in Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, third holiest place in Islam. Why would Hamas have to name an operation Al-Aqsa Flood? Oh, could it be because the Israelis had for the past months, years, been desecrating the third holiest shrine in Islam? Could it be that the Israelis were disrupting Islamic worshipers, throwing tear gas into a mosque, beating up women, bullying men? Maybe that's why it happened. Maybe the Palestinians were tired of being surrounded by a fence and surrounded. You know, there's a lot of people don't know this. They're like, Gaza isn't occupied. Really? What is the CLA? What is Kogat? These are two Israeli entities that control everything that happens inside Gaza. Nothing goes into Gaza unless it's approved by the CLA or Kogat. That means that you have to submit paperwork that gets approved by the Israelis, and the Israelis deny everything because they're in control. Nothing happens in Gaza unless the Israelis deem it fit to happen. That is the definition of occupation. And you ask, why did they do it on October 7th? Now, I'm an American. I come from a tradition that says, you oppress me, I take you out and declare my independence. We did it to the British tyranny. We beat the crown. They called us terrorists. Some of us were. Samuel Adams, a documented terrorist. You know, Paul Revere could be accused of a terror. Now, these are great patriots in the American mind because we believe that we were right. The British believe we were wrong. We beat the British. We got our independence. How is Palestine going to get their independence? Who's going to give it to them? No one. We know that. On October 6th, no one was talking about a genuine two-state solution. It was done, finished. Goodbye, des vidania. The Saudi Arabians were talking about normalizing relations with the Israelis. They had forgotten about their precondition, about the necessity of a Palestinian state existing. Oh, we'll talk about it. No one's going to talk about it because once you normalize relations, it all becomes about the money, the money, the money. Everybody's focused on the India, Middle East economic corridor, going from Mumbai through Dubai up through Saudi Arabia onto Jordan to Israel, Haifa onto Greece. That was it. Joe Biden made it the signature element of his G20 summit. Netanyahu stopped talking about the Iranian bomb in the United Nations long enough to brag about this, and Israel's rolling it. No one was talking about a Palestinian state. No one cared about the Palestinians. Definitely not the president of the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas, one of the most corrupt men in the world. And Fatah, what have they become? They become a mafia group that basically steals money meant to benefit the Palestinian people, puts it in their own pocket, builds villa after villa after villa after villa. The Palestinian people had been forgotten. Only one entity was speaking out for them. One. And it wasn't Hezbollah, and it wasn't Iran. They give words, they give words, they give words. Only one. Hamas. Hamas launched an attack against Israel on October 7th. Because if they had failed to do so, there would never be a Palestinian state. Regardless of what you think about what Hamas did on October 7th, you must acknowledge the following. Everybody's talking about a Palestinian state now. Everybody's saying that this has to be part of the political solution. That's a huge victory for the Palestinian people, which means it's a huge victory for Hamas. You call Hamas a terrorist organization, but you ignore the fact that Israel encouraged Hamas to make the transition from being purely a resistance group into being a political party capable of governance. Israel helped fund Hamas's politicization. Hamas won an election in 2006. People tend to forget that. They won a democratic election. They won more votes than Fatah. They controlled the legislature. Now, that was an outcome that Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, couldn't accept. Israel didn't want to accept. My God, they wanted democracy, but not that kind of democracy. No, we don't want democracy where the will of the people is manifested. We want democracy that we control the outcome, but they didn't control that outcome. And it led to a civil war where Hamas won control over Fatah in the Gaza Strip. They lost control on the West Bank, but they won control in Gaza. Therefore, they are responsible for the governance of Gaza. Now, if you're put in charge of governing people, what kind of government are you if you allow the perpetration of crimes, the crimes of occupation? Because again, Scott, the settlements were withdrawn in 2005. The settlements were, but Israeli control was not. Israel controlled everything. Ask Hamas if they were able, as the governing authority, to build a true port capable of receiving international shipments. No, Israel wouldn't allow it. Israel wouldn't allow it. Ask Hamas if they could build an airport where planes could land so that Palestinians could fly freely around the world as sovereign citizens. No, Israel wouldn't allow it. Ask Hamas if they could do anything without Israel's approval. And the answer is only one thing: resist. And that's what a legitimate governing authority does when their people are being subjected to the oppression of the occupier. And that's Israel, an occupying authority. So Hamas struck out. Scott, Hamas committed crimes. Really? You guys do know all the people that say that, and that in 2004, the International Court of Justice, which is sort of the body for the United Nations, for the global community to make final judgments about opinions regarding international law, determined that Israel was an occupying power and the Palestinians were an occupied people. And you do know, therefore, according to this 2004 opinion, that Israel has no inherent right of self-defense. The occupier can never, ever, under any circumstance, cite self-defense against actions that are derived from the occupied responding to the occupier. So, yeah, no, Hamas struck out as they should. And I'm telling everybody here, if you're a man or a woman worthy of the name, and you were a Palestinian living in Gaza, if you weren't with Hamas on October 7th, you stand for nothing. Nothing. Because it means you don't want a homeland. It means when you want to live in perpetual slavery, perpetual serfdom. No, free men and free women would have supported Hamas on that day. And they should still support Hamas to this day, because Hamas is struggling against an illegitimate occupying authority, a war criminal nation. Never forget that Israel is not a nation of innocents. These are people who elected a government that has said, we will not allow a Palestinian state. You do know, we hear a lot of talk about from the river to the sea, Hamas's charter. Well, gosh, when was Hamas formed? I think in the late 80s, sort of came up in the late 80s and all that. When was the Likud party formed? In the early 50s. You know who invented from the river to the sea? The Likud party. It's part of their founding charter. And they believe it and they act it. They will never tolerate a Palestinian state. Their entire being is designed to defeat Palestine, erase Palestine, erase Palestine. All these Zionists, all these pro-Israeli people are going, where are they supposed to go? The 6 to 9 to 7 million Jews that are there, where are they supposed to go? Why the hell don't you think about the Palestinians? Where are they supposed to go? You're so willing to evict them and have them absorbed by countries around the world. Why the hell can't the tables turn? And I will tell you what, you Israelis, you pro-Israelis, there's only 7 million of you. And when the time comes and 1 billion anti-Zionists gather on your borders, maybe you guys should go read the story of Smyrna. Today it's known as Izmir in Turkey. Read the story of Smyrna. What happened to Smyrna at the end of World War I, at the end of the Greek invasion of Turkey, at the end of the Greco-Turkish War, where the Turks counterattacked and drove the Greeks into the ocean and basically said, Greece is that way. Swim or die. That's the future of Israel, if Israel isn't careful, because no one's going to care. Right now, there are people that do care. I care. I believe in Israel's inherent right to exist. But Israel is defined by the United Nations in 1948, or if we want to, we can modify it to 1967. I think the Oslo Accords talk about returning to the 1967 borders. So be it. That Israel has a right to exist because the international community has said it must exist. Who am I to go against the will of the international community? But the international community has never green-lighted Eretz Israel, never green-lighted Greater Israel. They've always spoken about the need, the necessity for a Palestinian state. And if Israel today is politically controlled by people who say that Palestine can't exist, and the only solution is that Israel can't exist, and Israel must be eliminated, Smyrna will be repeated. Maybe they'll write about it being Jaffa or Tel Aviv or Haifa. But one way or the other, the Israelis, the political Zionists, will either learn how to peacefully live with their Palestinian neighbors, or they will be driven into the sea.